Welcome to the latest Connections video. This week I will tie together the notorious history of how the Catholic Church created a deliberate series of interconnected forgeries, or in layman's terms, outright lies which violate the Ten Commandments, to dominate medieval Western Europe. Establishing the origins of these forged precedents, I will demonstrate how and why the current princes of the Church believe their canon law puts them beyond the reach of secular law enforcement in their attempts to investigate incidents of child sexual abuse behind the closed doors of the Vatican. This video will not be a deep dive into each of these forgeries, as these have already been covered in their own videos. Here I will show how these forgeries built upon each other to further the Church's self-serving ambitions. Let's go chronologically and start with the passage in Matthew 16 that the Catholic Church bases its claims of primacy upon. Some of you may be familiar with this passage in the Gospel of Matthew that describes Peter being named the rock upon which the church will be built in verses 18 and 19. Now, what many Christians don't know is that this passage is considered by scholars to be a forgery for several reasons. Firstly, this passage does not appear in any of the other books of the New Testament. Additionally, if you look at the preceding and following verses, they flow together without the intrusion of the passage naming Peter. Compounding this, the passage with the preceding and following verses does appear in Mark and Luke. Therefore, scholars speculate that the passage naming Peter as the foundation of the church is a forged insertion of a later editor. Continuing with why it's considered a forgery is because there was no organized church in the 1st century, but only small communities of independent converts, of which we see evidence in Paul's letters. Jesus, his disciples, and Paul were all end times preachers, claiming the kingdom of God would manifest itself in their lifetimes. So why would Jesus found a church when the world as he knew it was coming to an end within their lifetimes? The passage describing an organized church must therefore belong to the 2nd century, after the establishment of churches, who had settled in for the long haul when Jesus and Paul's predictions for the imminent end of the world failed to materialize. Next, around 150, Justin Martyr wrote that Peter visited Rome. However, Justin made no mention that Peter was a bishop of a church there. Most biblical scholars dispute that Peter ever visited Rome. In biblical sources, Peter is only connected to Jerusalem and Antioch. The scholarly opinion, then, is that Justin put Peter in Rome as a counterbalance to the actual events of Paul's time and execution in Rome. Then, in 381, the Roman Emperor Theodosius I called the First Council of Constantinople partly to refute the increasing claims of Roman primacy coming from Pope Damasus. In reaction to this council, only at this time did a pope make the very first claim that papal primacy was derived through the unbroken succession of popes going back to Peter. Paradoxically, not a single Latin bishop attended this council, and it appears that Augustine was not aware the council had even taken place. Now, given Catholic claims of Roman primacy, it is therefore entirely inconsistent with church rhetoric that no Western bishops, including the Pope, attended. Additionally, every ecumenical council was called by an Eastern emperor, never a pope. However, this embarrassing, inconvenient truth would be glossed over by later popes, such as Gregory I, aka the Great, and Gregory VII of the Gregorian Reforms, who would simply declare that the popes called all the councils and only with papal sanctions were any councils and the ensuing canons developed valid. This was a blatant, retroactive rewriting of history, and many Christians still believe this sanitized Catholic version of early Christian history today. Shortly after the Council of Constantinople, the next forgery appeared, known as the Acts of Sylvester. This forgery was created to rectify the embarrassment that Pope Sylvester had done nothing of church consequence during the reign of Constantine, the first Christian emperor, and the man who called the first ecumenical council at Nicaea in 325. The claims made in the Acts of Sylvester are beyond ludicrous and downright insulting to any Christian of the era, as they claimed Constantine had been persecuting Christians until he was stricken with leprosy and baptized by Sylvester. I say insulting because Constantine had converted before Sylvester became pope, and Constantine had already bequeathed the Lateran Palace to the church. Then, in 494, Pope Gelasius wrote a letter to the Eastern Emperor known as the Doctrine of Two Powers, claiming the Pope was above secular rulers, as the Pope answers to God and is responsible for the Emperor's conduct in temporal matters. Gelasius also wrote a letter to the bishops stating a pope is immune from both secular and ecclesiastical charges, as popes can only be tried by God, never lesser mortals. This immunity concept then got absorbed into another series of forgeries a few years later. Known as the Symmachian Forgeries, written between 501 and 502, this claim of immunity became incorporated into the Sylvester accusatorial canon of the Constitutum Sylvestri. The accusatorial canon then went on to be included in the canon law collections of later centuries and was first invoked by Pope Leo III at his trial before Charlemagne in 800. 2 days after Charlemagne dismissed the charges, in a quid pro quo, Leo crowned Charlemagne Emperor of the Romans. The Sylvester accusatorial canon, emerging from a forgery, remains in effect in church canon law to this day. Another canon from the Constitutum Sylvestri claimed that bishops could only be tried by 72 other bishops, never by secular courts. Then, in the 800s, another forgery emerged building on both the Acts of Sylvester and the Constitutum Sylvestri. Known as the Pseudo-Isidore false Decretals, these documents emerged from a team of forgers in the Cluny Monastery in France, written in reaction to Louis the Pious, Charlemagne's son, who was imposing his will on the church and arresting bishops. As the name implies, the forgeries are a series of false decrees by earlier popes establishing the precedent of church independence from secular interference. The false decretals, drawing on the Constitutum Sylvestri, also mention that bishops can only be tried by other bishops. The Pseudo-Isidore forgeries are also where the infamous donation of Constantine derived, drawing on the Acts of Sylvester, claiming that Constantine had bequeathed authority of the Western Roman Empire to the Church while Constantine returned to govern the East. However, it would be a few centuries before popes started using and expanding on privileges apparently given in the forged donation, initially by Pope Leo IX, who would use it to claim primacy over the Patriarch of Constantinople and inaugurating the Great Schism in 1054. 2 decades later, Pope Gregory VII issued the Dictatus Papae in 1075, reiterating many of the forged church privileges of the past, including 2 direct references to the Symmachian Forgeries, and granting himself the right to depose any king or emperor who displeased him, and granted absolution to the people from obedience to their deposed monarch. The inference of the Dictatus is that the Pope is the universal supreme monarch of the entire world to whom all must submit. Now, let's jump forward to the start of the 21st century when the Boston Globe Spotlight team exposed the scale of sexual abuse and cover-up by the church. This aberrant sexual behavior was not new, as church records going back to the early 300s document this problem. In 1962, the scale of abuse occurring within the church caused the Vatican to issue Crimen Solicitationis, which only became public in 2003, and which enforced silence on pain of excommunication to all church members, clergy, and parishioners, nominally to protect the victim's privacy, not the church's. The key point of the Spotlight investigation and subsequent revelations of global abuse cover-up is that the church feels it is above secular law, which is why they stated they would conduct internal investigations. Not that their pretentious, self-serving claims did any good, as secular law enforcement has tried and imprisoned many clerics and imposed some very steep financial penalties. We can clearly see the historical connection between a series of church forgeries and the Vatican attitude to covering up the sex abuse. Then in 2021, in the first update to canon law since the 1983 Code of Canon Law that emerged following Vatican II, Francis ordered that all claims of abuse must be reported to their superior within the church, not to outside law enforcement. Naturally, victim survivor groups and other reform advocates pointed out this disappointing hypocrisy. Now you know the history of why the Church thinks it is okay to police itself and why it is not answerable to secular rule of law. Thanks for watching. Please check out the other videos on my channel if history is your thing, and see you next time.